Welcome to the channel where we break down the biggest stories shaping our world from global politics to economic shocks. If you want the truth behind the headlines, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Today, the world faces an unprecedented convergence of conflict, financial instability, and geopolitical uncertainty. The crisis in Iran is far from over. Oil prices are surging, gold continues its historic ascent, and global sovereign debt has reached levels that threaten economic collapse. Over the next hour, we'll explore the forces shaping this new era, the ongoing conflict in Iran, its impact on energy markets, the role of precious metals as a hedge, and the looming danger of debt defaults. This is not speculation. History, data, and financial modeling show us where we are headed and what is likely to happen over the next decade. The conflict in Iran is more complex than most people understand, and its ramifications extend far beyond the region. To comprehend the full picture, we need to examine not only the military actions, but the financial and political forces at play. Part 1. The Iran conflict, a dragged-out war. History has repeatedly shown that wars rarely go as planned. In 2003, the US-led invasion of Iraq was projected to last a few weeks. In reality, it lasted 8 years, costing trillions and reshaping the region. Today, a similar pattern is unfolding in Iran. The recent removal of Iran's supreme leader did not destabilize the regime. Instead, the government has created multiple layers of redundancy to maintain political continuity. This is a calculated strategy. Unlike Iraq, where insurgency and extremist groups emerged after regime change, Iran is prepared for both domestic and international challenges. The risk is not just military. Religious tensions between Shia and Sunni factions could escalate, particularly in Saudi Arabia, where nearly 40% of the population is Shia. This has the potential to ignite a broader regional conflict, perhaps even an Islamic civil war. The implications are profound, both regionally and globally. Military analysts, financial forecasters, and historical patterns all indicate that this conflict will not end quickly. It is likely to be long, drawn out, and costly, impacting not just Iran, but global markets, energy supplies, and financial systems. Part 2. Oil markets, surging prices, and strategic risks. Oil remains the lifeblood of the global economy. While the United States imports only about 3% of its oil from Iran, Europe is far more exposed, relying heavily on Middle Eastern supplies. Despite current prices, the market is likely underestimating the risk. Even strategic petroleum reserves cannot fully offset potential disruptions. 6 million barrels of oil are imported daily into the U.S., and releasing 1 million barrels from reserves barely scratches the surface. Global oil markets are sensitive to conflict, particularly in the Gulf. Attacks on shipping, missile strikes on infrastructure, and geopolitical uncertainty all drive prices upward. Historical patterns show that markets react slowly and often underestimate risk, creating volatility and opportunity for those paying attention. Energy scarcity is not hypothetical. Disruptions in supply can ripple through transportation, manufacturing, and electricity generation, affecting every aspect of the global economy. Part 3. Gold and precious metals, the neutral asset. As uncertainty grows, investors turn to gold and silver. These assets are rising not primarily because of inflation, but due to systemic and geopolitical risk. Gold functions as a neutral store of value. Unlike government-issued debt, which can be canceled, devalued, or defaulted on, gold holds intrinsic worth across borders. China, Europe, and private investors alike have been accumulating gold precisely for this reason. It is politically neutral, universally recognized, and a safeguard against systemic collapse. Silver also faces significant shortages. Supply restrictions, particularly from major producers like China, combined with rising industrial demand, suggest that silver prices may continue to climb. Unlike traditional equities or bonds, precious metals are not tied to any single government or policy, making them a reliable hedge in uncertain times. While gold is unlikely to replace modern currencies as a settlement medium, it will continue to serve as a hedge against default and financial instability, particularly in a world facing rising debt and geopolitical risk. Part 4. Sovereign debt and the risk of default. Debt is the underlying driver of much of the world's instability. Governments have borrowed continuously since World War II, often rolling over obligations rather than paying them down. Interest payments now exceed military spending, highlighting a system under strain. Historically, wars have often been used as a mechanism to reduce debt through hyperinflation, default, or simply ignoring obligations of prior governments. This is not theory. Europe, South America, and parts of Asia have all experienced sovereign defaults, and the consequences ripple through banks, pension funds, and financial systems. The lesson is clear. Markets, investors, and governments must recognize that debt accumulation, combined with geopolitical conflict, creates systemic risk, often underestimated until it is too late. Part 5. Global monetary system and the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar remains the global reserve currency, but not because of policy or political decisions. Its status is supported by three key factors. The United States is the largest consumer-based economy in the world. The U.S. debt market is deep, liquid, and globally trusted. The dollar has never been canceled or devalued in a way that undermines trust. Other major currencies, including the euro, face structural limitations. European nations have never fully consolidated debt, creating systemic weaknesses. Currency manipulation, restrictions, and cancellations have historically undermined trust in many other reserves. Gold continues to serve as a neutral hedge against these risks. While a gold-backed currency standard is unlikely, gold's intrinsic value remains stable across borders and geopolitical tensions. Part 6. Lessons from history, war, debt, and economic collapse. History shows repeated patterns. Debt crises follow wars. Defaults are common, markets react with delay, and neutral assets like gold rise in value. Governments rarely learn from past mistakes, often repeating cycles of intervention, debt accumulation, and conflict. The removal of leaders, as seen in Iraq and Iran, rarely produces the intended political outcome. Instead, conflicts escalate, debt grows, and markets face prolonged instability. This is a systemic issue, not a short-term anomaly. Part 7. Implications for investors and citizens. For investors and citizens, the implications are significant. Precious metals like gold and silver are essential hedges. Energy costs are likely to rise due to persistent geopolitical risks. Sovereign debt requires careful monitoring, as defaults are increasingly probable. Understanding the interplay between military action, financial markets, and global economics is critical. Those who ignore historical patterns and current indicators do so at their own risk. Part 8. Looking ahead. 10-year outlook. The next decade is poised for turbulence. Gold could reach $10,000 an ounce by 2032. Oil prices may continue upward, and sovereign defaults may reshape global financial systems. Monetary reform will likely emerge by 2032, redefining trade, currencies, and reserve structures. In short, we are entering a period of prolonged uncertainty and systemic risk. Historical patterns, capital flows, and geopolitical behavior all point to extended volatility in markets, energy, and currency systems. Conclusion. The world faces a complex interplay of war, debt, and financial risk. The Iran conflict is just one element, but it illustrates the broader patterns we've seen repeatedly throughout history. Rising oil, surging gold, and unsustainable debt create pressures that will shape global economies for years to come. Preparation, understanding, and prudent risk management are essential. Those who recognize these patterns have the opportunity to navigate this uncertainty, while those who ignore history will likely face the consequences. The world is entering a period of extraordinary instability, one that will shape global politics, finance, and energy markets for years to come. The conflict in Iran is not a fleeting headline. It is a complex, multi-layered geopolitical crisis that is likely to persist for years rather than months. This is not just about military engagements. It is about the intertwining of religion, politics, finance, and strategic global interests. To understand what is unfolding, one must examine history, analyze data, and consider the patterns that have repeatedly emerged across centuries. Wars are rarely quick, clean, or limited in their consequences, and this situation is no exception. When you look back at Iraq in 2003, we were told the conflict would last weeks, not months. It lasted 8 years, draining trillions of dollars, destabilizing the region, and creating conditions for extremist groups to flourish. Yet despite this lesson, the same strategies are being applied today in Iran. The assumption seems to be that removing a leader or striking at select targets will cause a regime to collapse. History shows that rarely happens. In Iran, the government is prepared for contingencies, implementing layers of redundancy and leadership to ensure continuity, even if top figures are eliminated. This indicates a sophisticated understanding of both domestic and international vulnerabilities. The regime structure is resilient, and any outside attempt to destabilize it faces deep institutional and societal resistance. The risk extends far beyond Iran's borders. Shia-Sunni tensions are deeply embedded in the region's socio-political fabric. Saudi Arabia, for example, is a Sunni-majority kingdom with a significant Shia minority, nearly 40% of the population. Any escalation in Iran could inflame these divisions, potentially sparking broader regional conflicts. The result could resemble a civil war on a religious scale, amplifying instability in ways that are difficult to contain. Understanding this requires more than just following news reports. It requires appreciating historical patterns, recognizing sectarian divides, and considering the consequences of foreign intervention. Military considerations, while important, are only part of the picture. Financial and economic ramifications are profound. Oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, is particularly sensitive to conflict in the Middle East. While the United States imports a relatively small percentage of its oil from Iran, around 3%, Europe is far more dependent on Middle Eastern supplies. Disruptions in shipping routes, such as the Strait of Hormuz, or attacks on infrastructure, can have outsized effects on global energy markets. The release of strategic petroleum reserves, while helpful in the short term, cannot offset structural risks. For context, the U.S. imports approximately 6 million barrels of oil per day. Even releasing 1 million barrels from reserves is merely a stopgap measure, insufficient to stabilize global supply if conflict escalates. Markets often underestimate these risks, reacting slowly and inconsistently, creating periods of volatility that savvy investors can anticipate. This is where precious metals enter the equation. Gold and silver have always been reliable stores of value during times of uncertainty. Gold, in particular, is politically neutral, universally recognized, and immune to the vagaries of any single government. Investors, nations, and central banks have been stockpiling gold precisely because it provides a hedge against systemic risk. China, for example, has been actively acquiring gold to insulate itself from geopolitical pressures and potential debt defaults. Silver, too, is experiencing scarcity. Supply constraints, coupled with rising industrial demand, indicate that these metals are likely to continue appreciating in value. Unlike equities or government bonds, which are subject to political manipulation and default risk, gold and silver remain tangible, globally accepted assets. The reason gold rises is not necessarily inflation. It rises in response to uncertainty. Looking back at history, during periods of war or geopolitical stress, gold has surged. In 1980, gold prices jumped dramatically amid the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, climbing from $176 to $400 per ounce by the end of that year. Today, gold is on a similar trajectory, climbing rapidly due to a combination of geopolitical tension, sovereign debt pressures, and market uncertainty. Silver, often overlooked, faces even greater structural scarcity, amplified by restricted exports from major producers and rising industrial demand. The precious metals market is signaling that systemic risk is real and that traditional financial instruments may be insufficient to hedge against it. This brings us to sovereign debt, an issue that is often ignored in mainstream discussions but is central to understanding the broader economic landscape. Governments around the world, particularly the United States, have been borrowing continuously since World War II, often without serious intent to repay. Interest payments now exceed military expenditures, demonstrating the unsustainable nature of current fiscal policies. Historically, wars have often been used as mechanisms to manage debt through inflation, restructuring, or outright default. Europe, South America, and parts of Asia have all experienced sovereign defaults, and these events have had cascading effects on banks, pension funds, and financial markets. Defaults are rarely isolated. They ripple through economies, creating crises that can persist for years. The role of the US dollar as the global reserve currency is also critical to this discussion. The dollar's status is not derived from policy or political decisions alone. It is backed by a combination of economic dominance, market depth, and global trust. The United States represents the largest consumer-based economy in the world, attracting trade, investment, and capital flows. Its debt markets are the deepest and most liquid globally, providing a stable venue for raising capital. And unlike many other currencies, the dollar has never been canceled or devalued in a way that undermines confidence. Other major currencies, such as the euro, suffer from structural weaknesses. European nations have never fully consolidated debt, leading to systemic fragility. Restrictions, currency cancellations, and political instability have historically undermined trust in alternative reserve currencies. This makes the dollar indispensable, yet also highlights the fragility of the global financial system, which is heavily dependent on one nation's fiscal and monetary policies. History offers valuable lessons for today. Debt crises frequently follow wars, defaults are common, and markets often underestimate risk until it is too late. The removal of leaders or regime change rarely produces intended outcomes, often escalating conflicts and increasing instability. Iraq is a prime example. Removing Saddam Hussein created conditions for ISIS to emerge, destabilizing the region for years. Iran is prepared for similar contingencies. Removing the Ayatollah or top leaders does not guarantee collapse. The government has institutional resilience and popular legitimacy among certain segments of the population. Understanding these dynamics is critical for anyone seeking to navigate the global landscape. Investors and citizens alike must take these realities seriously. Energy costs are likely to rise due to persistent geopolitical risks. Precious metals are essential hedges against systemic uncertainty. Sovereign debt requires careful monitoring, as defaults are increasingly probable. Those who ignore historical patterns and current indicators do so at their own peril. Awareness, preparedness, and prudent risk management are more important now than ever. In conclusion, the world is facing a prolonged period of uncertainty and systemic risk. The Iran conflict is just one element of a larger global picture that includes rising sovereign debt, energy insecurity, and monetary system vulnerabilities. Historical patterns provide insight into likely outcomes, emphasizing the importance of preparedness, strategic investment, and awareness of systemic risks. Gold, silver, and energy assets serve as essential hedges, while careful monitoring of sovereign debt and capital flows is critical for navigating this complex landscape. The next decade will test the resilience of financial systems, governments, and individuals alike, making informed analysis and strategic planning more important than ever. As we continue to trace the trajectory of global instability, it becomes increasingly clear that the financial world as we know it is approaching a reckoning. The conflicts in the Middle East, particularly in Iran, are just one manifestation of a much broader systemic stress. Underneath the headlines lies a deeply entrenched problem that has been building for decades: sovereign debt. Nations around the globe have been borrowing relentlessly, rolling over interest, and accumulating obligations with little intention or sometimes even the capability of repayment. This is not a modern anomaly. It is a repeating pattern throughout history. What makes the current period particularly precarious is the sheer scale of debt and the interconnectedness of global financial systems. We are no longer dealing with isolated countries defaulting here and there. We are on the brink of a synchronized global debt crisis. To understand the severity, consider the United States. National debt has been compounding since World War II, driven by military expenditures, social programs, and fiscal policies that prioritize short-term political gains over long-term stability. Today, interest payments alone surpass military spending, crowding out other critical areas of public investment. When governments reach this point, they have historically resorted to inflation, debt restructuring, or war as mechanisms to address their obligations. None of these are sustainable solutions. They merely delay the inevitable reckoning. And it is not just the US. Europe, Japan, and emerging markets carry their own burdens, often without the same structural advantages that make U.S. debt attractive globally. The result is a system that is fragile, overstretched, and vulnerable to shocks. This fragility directly impacts currency markets. The U.S. dollar remains the dominant global reserve currency, but its dominance is maintained not solely by policy or military might, but by trust in the stability of its debt markets and the depth of its financial infrastructure. Other currencies, like the euro or the yen, lack similar credibility due to political fragmentation, debt imbalances, or structural weaknesses. A global debt crisis would inevitably call into question the reliability of fiat currencies, triggering capital flight into assets that are perceived as safe, primarily gold. Gold is unique because it is tangible, universally accepted, and independent of any single government. Unlike paper currency, gold cannot be printed at will, cannot be canceled, and cannot be manipulated politically. Its value is rooted in scarcity, historical trust, and global acceptance. In conclusion, the world is entering a period of unprecedented financial and geopolitical turbulence. Sovereign debt, currency instability, and escalating conflicts will continue to drive uncertainty, making tangible assets like gold essential for protection. History shows us that crises create opportunity, but only for those who understand the risks and prepare accordingly. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and recognize the patterns that shape our global economy, because the decisions we make today will define our financial security tomorrow.